It's recording. So,
Okay, ready.
all right. What was it like for you to grow up in America during World War II?
World War II. I can remember exactly where I was in 1941 when the Japanese attacked. I'd come home from church. One time there was a gas station on 37th Street and 6th Avenue, a Pennzoil gas station. I used to get out there and hang out. I remember that. But growing up, of course, I was a younger teenager then, and we had different duty. We had ration books. You only got a pound of butter or 2 pounds of sugar, and then they had what they called a civil defense. And if I was old enough that I could be a junior in civil defense, and they used to have blackouts every month. The whole city was blacked out, and the senior civil defense and myself, we would walk along the streets, and if we could see lights, if anybody's they pulled their shades down, we would go inform them that their lights were showing. So that was one of my jobs. I remember we had a lot of scrap drives. Anytime, and the theater sometimes would have a special, and if you took an aluminum can or any type of aluminum thing, you got in to see the movie for free. So I remember those things. But we had everybody was regulated. We all had we had these ration books. You could only get so much this and so much of that. But I remember as a boy, I worked for the Alternate Tribune. I started working when I was 13, and I worked in the mailroom. So as each event happened, when the invasion and everything had happened, I was there at the newspaper when they got the report of it. So I got to see all those things, or read all those things first. And but everybody was very patriotic. Everybody was. I can remember Roosevelt and Keith. They were junior high schools then. They're gone now.
Yeah.
But the last year that some of those guys played, they quit after they quit school after the game. Went down to the post office, and about 6 or 8 of them enlisted in the service. They lied about their ages and enlisted in the service and went to war. But people at that time were very patriotic. You did everything that you could. You saved whatever you could, and you helped each other out. It was a great time. And even as bad as it was, people were much more together than what they are today. Yeah. But like I say, I had it was just I worked during that, and I was fortunate enough to work for in the mailroom at the newspaper, so I knew what was going on most of the time. And I'm trying to think of anything else I can say. But now during the Depression, my father worked for the railroad. He was the block operator. In other words, he threw the switches in the towers that let the passenger trains go through while the freight trains waited for their turn. And he had bought a farm up in Loretta. That's how, where St. Francis College is?
Yeah.
Okay, well, outside of Loretta, about 4 mile out there, I lived in a farm till I was 10. And during the Depression, we fed everybody. Everybody came to the farm to eat for Sunday. That was their Sunday meal. They took home what they had. And then in those days, we put a lot of food up. My mother would can tomatoes and pears and green beans and all that thing. So that provided all what you needed for over the winter area. And the next summer we planted the garden, and everybody came up to eat. So, but it was good times because here again, most of it was family. In fact, my sister lived with me on the farm. She and her husband and my niece, they lived on the farm. Well, the railroad wasn't doing much. They weren't doing much hiring, and my brother-in-law would be off. Then he had to go back to work, and then that's the way they did it. But when things got tough, they always came up to the farm. And, they were days when people were poor. I mean, well, even when after my mother and father divorced, and we came back to Altoona, right over here in 36, and I had a younger brother, 7, and my mother did housework, and with that time we had coal furnaces, and they had an ash place where you took the ashes. So one of the neighbors used to give me a nickel for taking all those ashes over and dumping them on the ash pit. When I started to work at the newspaper, I got 35 cents an hour what I was paid.
35 cents.
But I look back on it, and everybody just did their job, and it was just like it came natural. We did whatever we had, and we used to, and when we went to junior high school, you could buy stamps and put in a book, 10 cents I think they were. When you got your book, 1750, that bought you a war bond, what they call war bonds. They call them savings bonds now, but they call them war bonds. Then they gave you one certificate. It was for 1750. I think it was 20 years. It was worth $25. That was another thing we did during the war. But, I'm trying to think. Let's say it was I walked to school where the ticket, you can ride a streetcar for 4 cents. They had to take special tickets for the kids for 4 cents. Most of the time I walked. Occasionally I had a ticket that I could go. So that takes care of the depression and kind of my childhood.
Were you, when you were growing up, were you ever scared of like the possibility of any actual attacks being made?
Well, I don't know as I was ever scared, but we were taught that we were pretty safe in general. But the Germans submarine came over here, and we had, I think it was
the
6 of them. They were going to put poison in the water. That actually happened.
Yeah.
And but as a result, we were pretty confident we were safe. Yeah. Today, I wouldn't think we would be safe with the drones.
Do you?
But on the whole, yeah, we felt pretty well protected, and because at that time it seemed so, Europe was far away. It didn't seem like anything to us then. We were too far away, and we were happier that the war was over there than in our country. So, but as being scared, I don't think I was ever scared that actually anything would actually happen. But we still had to prepare. Like I say, we had our blackout nights. We had a train just in case. You never knew what was going to happen. So,
did you ever recall any German or Japanese Americans who lived around here that got discriminated against? Or
no, not in Altoona. I never knew of anybody that was discriminated. I know there were other areas where they all had to go to a camp, German camp or Japanese camp. They did that. But in Altoona, proper, no. I never knew anybody that had to do that. No doubt. Good.
Do you? Did you watch cartoons? Like, was there any propaganda cartoons or anything that you could recall?
I never saw any propaganda cartoons. All the cartoons we had were to buy victory bonds or give to this. Anything would be a benefit to the war.
Yeah.
We didn't. But as far as any propaganda, used to have that Rosie the Riveter sign. You know, the ladies would
Yeah.
go to take their jobs for a man so he could go to the service. But as any actual propaganda, never saw any propaganda about anything that would be derogatory or anything like that. No, it was all about
Kind of uniting
making
together.
America good at that time. Yeah, that's about it.
Do you remember what it felt like when you heard the official news that the war had ended?
Oh, I was happy. Yeah, of course. There again, I was working for the newspaper, the mail room, and we got the news, and yeah, it was. We were all happy. I guarantee you. Everybody was happy. Yeah, that's. I went home and told my mother, my brother, that the war was over. That it had come to the newspaper, and we were finished. And of course, there were a lot of bigger celebrations in New York and those places when they
Yeah.
had a lot of servicemen. We did that. We had a canteen here for servicemen during World War II down on 12th Street. If the men came in on a train, they could get off the train and go in and get food and do whatever they needed to do before the train left, and they could get back up. Or on the weekends they had dances there where if there were men would take care of women would come in and dance with the men if they were going by on a train. So we did have that. Yeah, it was a good thing. Yeah.
Jumping forward a few years, you were in the Korean conflict,
I was
right?
in the Korean War. Yes.
You were in the Marines, I believe.
I enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1947, and I was in the active reserve. And then August the 14th, well, actually August the 12th, our whole company, that picture there that I showed you,
Yeah.
we marched from down on Chestnut Avenue. The armory was an armory down there, and we marched from there to the train, to the station. We all got on the train at the same time, and we all left on August the 12th. And we got into Camp Lejeune in North Carolina on August the 14th. And when we got in there, we didn't stay together as a company. They split. Everybody split up. 2 days later, August the 16th, Maury LaRoque, who was a contractor here in Altoona, we were the last two guys left. And I forget where Maury went, and I didn't even stay on the main base. I got transferred to what they call tent camp. We went through Jacksonville, North Carolina. It was about 5 miles off the base. And at that base was grave registration, what that was assigned to. And then they had supply depot, and they had a triple anti-aircraft, and they had C-47 base for transportation in there, and for moving things in and out of the base from different bases. From there, I was there until December. In December, I got transferred to the infantry, and I was a machine gunner. That was my job. I actually carried a machine gun. I was a guy that fired. And then we went to. We were up to Little Creek, Virginia. I was up there for 3 months. We taught the men from West Point and from Annapolis how to make landings, coming down off a ship and getting into barges and making landings. I had 3 months there. Then I went down to Vieques, Puerto Rico for 4 months. And that's a picture that I showed you where I was in the book there, where I was in with my rifle and all that. Well, that's where we were then. Then I came back, and one day they called me from up the battalion office and said, "It says in your record book you can type." I said, "Yeah, I can type," because my civilian job was a monotype operator for the Times Tribune. That's what I did. That's when I was after high school. And so they said, well, they put me in charge of weapons companies. In other words, what I did, that whole weapons company, all those men in that company I took care of their personal record. Every time they went to jail, they went home on liberty, they got in trouble, or if they got promoted, anything happened to them, I had to fill that in their individual record book. Well, then I was there until the Korean War ended. And when the war ended, then they made what they called a release of reserves. And my job was to make up, it's a DD 214. That's your final paper when you get out of the service. And my job was to send these men, when they came home, they'd go into a casualty company. I would make them go for physicals. I would get their pay straightened up with all the money they had coming, take care of all the details they had to do, and then type up that paper, which is about an 8.5 by 11 information paper. Then it was my job to take it to the adjutant and have him sign it. And 3 days later, I would be going down to the company and say, "You're on your way home." That was the best job I ever had in the Marine Corps. It was a good job.
So, you were never actively deployed overseas to Korea?
No, never in combat. No.
Never in combat.
No.
Were you kind of disappointed by that, or did you?
No, I'll tell you, I missed 3 drafts.
You missed 3 drafts?
Yeah, to go over. For whatever reason, only by the grace of God, my mother's prayers. That's what I always say. That I didn't go over because I came home on a Sunday or a Friday night, and I said to my mother, I said, "We're shipping out." And when I go back, and she came down on Sunday morning. So "You're not going anywhere." So I talked to God. She was a praying mother. I didn't go anywhere. I never did. I missed 2 more drafts after that. I would get transferred for whatever reason. I'd have a different job and they didn't need me. So, because what they used to do, they would, if you were a BAR man and they needed a BAR man, well, they just meant you pulled you out and you went. That was the way it was. Yeah, everybody had their special. And I was the smallest guy in my squad, and I had to carry that machine gun. And it was and I used to say the Sergeant Nuska, he was from Newcastle, Pennsylvania, big Polish guy. And I said, "Why do I have to carry this machine gun? You got those big guys." He says, "Because you make the smallest target. That's why you carried it." I was the smallest guy, and I was making the smallest target. That's why I had to carry the gun.
Did you, when we got into the War of Korea, did you agree with our being involved there, or?
Well, in those days, growing up, things just happened. One thing happened after another, and you didn't know. I had a lot of good friends who died. I had some buried out in Alto, the rest and over here in Calvary Cemetery that were killed in the war. But it was just when you signed up for the military, that was your job. You did what you were. In the military, you just do what you're told. You don't ask questions. So that's the way we did it. And after it was over, I thought, well, we did our job over there, because goodness knows what would happen if the North had won and beat the South or whatever it was. But the saddest thing at the Korean War, we had probably more men that froze to death than were shot, because the government, when they went over there, they had summer clothing. Well, when winter came, they never got their winter. So those guys froze to death. That upset me. When I found that out, there's a book, I can't tell you the name of it now, but I read it and I thought, yeah, if you want to move on, that's my plan. It annoys me sometimes. But that did upset me. That I thought, those men at least should have had a fighting chance, and they didn't. They just froze to death. And I have a good friend who I meet at the restaurant. He comes in every Thursday, and he has his Korean War hat on, and And he was actually up there when all this happened. But he was an Army guy. He wasn't a Marine, but he was an Army guy. But the Army was just as much involved up there too. And it was not good. It was not good. And that was one of my disappointments about the Korean War. That those men never had the right clothing to wear when they were out fighting. That just.
It's a sad thing.
It's the government, the people sitting in Washington don't realize what is going on where you're at. So they're making their judgments from there, and but they could have sent winter clothing. Yeah.
Do you after the Korean War, I think the next major war was the Vietnam War. Do you remember what's your reaction to the announcements of us going
of
over?
course, I was married and I had children, and I read about it, and the only way I can analyze it is after that. I thought it was, in my own opinion, it was more of a political war than it was, for whatever reason. Because it ended, we didn't accomplish anything. We had a lot of good men die, and I was always upset. When we came home from the Korean War, I didn't even get my medals. I don't know what medals I have. I could call there's a place I could call and get them, but at 96 I don't even know what to bother with. But those men came home and they were treated like dirt. And I will tell you one thing. The difference between the Korean War and the Vietnam War, we didn't have drugs in the Korean War.
Yeah.
When they went to Vietnam, there were a lot of people got involved in drugs and things. That's where some of the problem of the drug problem came, because those guys came back, and first of all, they weren't treated decent, and that had to have a heavy effect on them. I felt badly for them. And I always thought of it as a political war rather than a war. I wonder why we're fighting sometimes.
What about the people who
Pardon me?
What about the people who fled from America to avoid the draft? Did you hear anything about that happening?
No, I don't recall that. No.
You don't recall anything like that?
No.
It was a big thing that a lot of people did. They would flee to Canada to avoid the draft. And some people get obviously upset about that, while others are like, yeah, they need to avoid the war because a lot of people just didn't agree with the war.
Oh yeah, a lot of people didn't agree. Yeah. Oh, there was a lot more controversy about that war than there was the Korean War. Yeah.
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 Did you was there a lot of news going on about the the Vietnam War at the time? Like, did you see a lot of news about it?
Oh yeah,
on
there was
TV?
a lot of news. Yeah, every night it was, and it wasn't good. It wasn't good. It was, they would tell some of the tales of some of those guys, what information they could release. They didn't release all the information. Yeah, they couldn't tell you. You couldn't see how bad it really was. They would just show you maybe what would happen on a given day, where we might move up, and then the next day we might be back where we started. So, and then the Vietnam War, there was a lot more use of the helicopters.
Yeah.
Those men that went in and picked up the wounded and flew back out. Now they didn't have combat. They weren't combat veterans because they didn't go into like 46. Well, the war was over in 45, but they were they were still serving their time, and then they got caught in the Korean War. So some of them weren't very happy.
I think I do just have when the Vietnam War ended, was you, like, obviously you probably would have been happy, but like, just how did you feel when the war ended? Were you like?
Oh, I was glad. I was glad it was over. I lived through World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, and after a while it becomes old hat. War is not good anytime, and very destructive for families, and you lose your mother, or you lose your father, or your uncle, or your cousin, or like that, and a lot of families, it made a great impact on their family life after the Vietnam War, because they lost whatever they lost, their husband or whatever, and like I say. But the biggest thing about that was the way they were treated when they came home. That was terrible. Because they were just over there doing their job. You know, the government sent you over. That's what you do. Well, the government didn't take any responsibility for them, and I don't even think the government stood up right. It's been a long time. I see a Vietnam War veteran now. I always congratulate him, because even though I was in the Korean War, because I know how they were treated when they came home. But the war itself, like I say, if you'd asked me what it was all about, I couldn't tell you. All I know, I think it was political. That's what I think it really was. Yeah.
I think we mainly got involved to stop the spread of communism, because we knew.
Well, somebody had to do it with maybe the spread of communism, but we had a lot of communism in other countries. We didn't go to war with them. So, but communism is not a good thing. Socialism has never worked in all the countries they tried. That's never worked. Communism ends up as a dictatorship, because there's a few running the whole show. You can take China today. The elite run the program, and the other ones are just peons doing what they're told. Cuba was another place. When I was in the service, even in Puerto Rico, we went in there on leave. I went into San Juan, Puerto Rico for leave, and there were certain sections of the city you didn't go in, because that was a communist area. So we were told, from here, you don't go that way, you go left, you don't go right, because that's, so that was, just, you learn as you live.
Do you, just out of curiosity, it's not one of the questions I gave to you, but just out of curiosity, do you remember any part of the Cold War at all? Like,
oh, the Cold War. Yeah, the Cold War was, when people would get, when they had the wall, and
yeah,
we would have people in the church that would try and get material in through that, and they invented ways to get through. I can remember reading stories of what they did and how they disguised things to get things through. But there was a lot of tension on both sides. More so on Russia's side than our side. And I would have rather had a Cold War than a real war. Let's put it that way.
Do you remember the any part of the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Cuban Missile. Well, yeah, that's just what I read in the paper. It's about all I knew about that. Yeah, it's you didn't get much information except what you got on the news or what you read in the paper. Yeah, it wasn't as frightening as a real war. Yeah.
All right. I think that's all the questions I had to ask you for today. Thank you so much, Paul.
You're quite welcome. My pleasure.